In the small frontier town of Red Willow, rumors moved like dust on a windy afternoon, quick, dirty, and impossible to escape. No matter how hard Tomas Greyfeather tried to live quietly, the whispers always found him. Tomas was Apache, born in the hills beyond the town where his people had lived for generations. But unlike many men of his tribe, he chose a peaceful path. He farmed, traded fairly, and helped anyone who asked. He never carried a rifle into town. He never raised his voice. And to the settlers of Red Willow, that made him suspicious. "He's too calm," said the saloon owner. "A man who won't fight can't be trusted," muttered a ranch hand. "Probably hiding something," others whispered. The town had been built on fear. Years earlier, violent clashes between settlers and native tribes had scarred the land. Many families had lost loved ones, and anger turned into hatred. Instead of learning the truth about Apache culture, people chose easy stories where every Apache was dangerous, cruel, or savage. But Tomas was none of those things. Each morning, he rose before sunrise to fetch water for the elderly widow who lived near the creek. He repaired broken fences for struggling ranchers without asking for payment. He guided lost travelers safely back to the main road. When children teased him or threw stones, he simply smiled and walked away. To the town, this gentleness looked like weakness. "Any man who lets himself be insulted like that ain't got a spine," one miner laughed, but Tomas knew better. His grandfather had taught him a powerful Apache belief. The strongest warrior is the one who controls his anger. Violence, his elders said, should only be used to protect, not to prove pride. One afternoon, while Tomas helped unload supplies at the trading post, Sarah Miller arrived on a dusty stagecoach from Missouri. She had come to teach at the small schoolhouse. Unlike most newcomers, she didn't stare at Tomas with fear. Instead, she watched how he worked, patient, careful, respectful. When a crate slipped from a worker's hands, Tomas caught it before it fell, saving the man's foot. The crowd gasped, but Tomas only nodded politely. "Thank you," the worker said, embarrassed. "No trouble," Tomas replied. Sarah noticed over the next weeks. She saw him teaching children how to read animal tracks and identify edible plants. She saw him listening to elders with deep respect. When two farmers argued over land boundaries, Tomas helped them settle the matter peacefully. Sarah grew curious. She had grown up in a home where her father taught her that true courage meant doing what was right, even when others mocked you. Tomas reminded her of that lesson. One evening, she finally spoke to him. "People say you're weak," she said honestly. Tomas smiled. "People say many things." "Aren't you angry?" she asked. "Anger blinds," he replied softly. "I prefer to see clearly." Their friendship grew, and soon so did rumors. "She's spending time with that Apache," townsfolk whispered. "Why would a schoolteacher lower herself? He's probably tricking her." But Sarah didn't listen. She saw what others refused to see: a man of integrity. When Tomas told her about his people, she learned truths the town had ignored. Apache society valued community, wisdom, and balance. Elders guided decisions. Women were respected. Children were taught responsibility early. These facts surprised her. They challenged everything she had heard. When Tomas asked her to marry him, the town exploded with gossip. Why him? He's not man enough. She regretted. But Sarah stood firm. "I choose him because he is kind," she said. "Because he respects me. because he is strong in ways you don't understand. Still, Red Willow laughed. They expected failure. They expected shame. They expected proof they were right. Tomas heard every word. But he didn't fight back. He simply prepared for his wedding quietly, as Apache tradition taught, honoring family, thanking elders, and reflecting on responsibility. For Tomas, marriage wasn't about proving himself. It was about building a life of trust and respect. And though the town didn't realize it yet, this quiet man they mocked was about to teach them the most important lesson of all. True strength isn't loud. It doesn't boast. It doesn't hurt others to feel powerful. It stands steady when the world tries to knock it down. The morning of the wedding arrived with a pale sunrise and a nervous silence that hung over Red Willow like fog. Word had spread through every corner of town. The Apache man was marrying the schoolteacher today. Some came out of curiosity. Others came to judge. A few came hoping to witness failure. Sarah stood inside the small cabin she rented near the schoolhouse, smoothing her simple cotton dress. It wasn't white like the gown she'd seen back east. There were no silk ribbons or fancy lace. But she didn't mind. She wanted a wedding that felt honest, just like Tomas. Her hands trembled as she pinned her hair. Not from fear, but from knowing the weight of what she was doing. She wasn't just marrying a man. She was crossing a line the town had drawn in hatred. Outside, people gathered near the cottonwood tree by the river. Apache families stood on one side. Settlers stood on the other. An invisible wall separated them. Years of mistrust kept their feet rooted in place. Tomas arrived quietly with his uncle and grandfather. He wore a clean buckskin shirt decorated with simple beadwork that told his family story. Each bead had meaning: honor, family, patience. It wasn't decoration. It was identity. His grandfather placed a hand on his shoulder. Today you carry two worlds, the elder said. Walk with care, Tomas nodded. He knew marrying Sarah would not only affect them, it would affect both communities. As Sarah walked toward the tree, whispers followed her. She'll regret it. Just wait. Poor girl. But Sarah kept her head high. Under the cottonwood, an Apache elder stepped forward. His hair was silver, his eyes wise. He began speaking in his native language, then translated slowly so everyone could understand. In our way, he said, marriage is not ownership. It is partnership, two people walking side by side. Some settlers exchanged confused glances. This was not what they expected. They were used to weddings where the woman promised obedience. This was different. The elder continued, a husband must protect, not control. A wife must guide, not follow. Together they build the fire of the family. This moment became a quiet lesson for the town. Many realized they knew nothing about Apache values. Their stories had been wrong. The elder asked Tomas to speak. I promise to respect Sarah's voice, Tomas said. Her dreams will be my dreams. Her fears will be my fears. Then Sarah spoke. I promise to stand beside Tomas even when the world stands against him. Silence fell. No dramatic music. No loud cheers. Just truth. The elder tied a braided cord around their hands, an Apache symbol of unity. This knot, he explained, cannot be undone easily. Marriage is not a game. It is a responsibility. Again, settlers listened. Some looked uncomfortable. Others thoughtful. After the ceremony, Apache women shared food they had prepared: cornbread, roasted meat, beans, wild berries. At first, settlers hesitated. Is it safe? One woman whispered, but Sarah picked up a plate and smiled. Please, she said. Join us. Slowly, a few settlers stepped forward. They tasted unfamiliar flavors. They asked questions. What is this? How do you cook it? Who taught you? For the first time, real conversation happened between the two groups. Not shouting, not arguing, just learning. This was an important historical moment. In the real Wild West, many conflicts happened because people refused to understand each other's cultures. Education and shared experiences were the only bridges strong enough to cross hatred. As the sun lowered, some settlers even laughed with Apache families. Children chased each other near the river, not caring about race or history. They just played. But not everyone approved. A group of men stood near the saloon, arms crossed, watching. He still ain't a real man, one sneered. Tonight will prove it, another said. They waited for failure. They believed weakness would reveal itself. When the sun went down, Tomas heard the rumors, but he stayed calm. He thanked every guest Apache and settler alike. He showed respect to both sides. His grandfather watched proudly. You walk strong, the old man said, even when they don't see it. As Sarah and Thomas walked away together toward their small cabin, eyes followed them. Some hopeful, some hateful, some curious. That night would decide everything. Not because of what would happen in the cabin, but because the town had already started to change, even if they didn't realize it yet. That night, the sky over Red Willow was heavy with clouds, and a chill wind rattled the wooden shutters of the small cabin where Tomas and Sarah would spend their first night as husband and wife. The townsfolk whispered among themselves in the saloon, certain that the quiet, gentle Apache would somehow fail to prove they had been right all along. They said he couldn't stand up for himself. One man said, shaking his head, "She regret it before sunrise," another muttered, but Tomas didn't care what they thought. He had spent his life living quietly, moving with intention rather than showing off, and tonight would be no different. For him, marriage was not a performance. It was a promise. Sarah entered the cabin carrying a lantern, its light dancing against the walls. She looked nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she set it on the table. Thomas stepped forward and took her hand gently. The softness of his touch was in contrast to the hard judgments of the outside world. "You don't need to fear," he said, his voice calm but steady. "Tonight, we only need to be ourselves." Sarah looked into his eyes and saw something the town could never see, a quiet strength rooted in patience, honor, and integrity. She remembered the lessons he had taught her over the past weeks. How to track animals without disturbing the land. How to listen before speaking. How to understand people rather than judge them. Those lessons weren't just about survival. They were about life. As the storm outside began to grow, the wind howling and rain tapping against the roof, Tomas moved around the cabin, securing shutters and making a fire. Every action was careful, methodical, and confident. He didn't shout or complain, even as the storm made the old cabin creak and sway. Sarah watched him in awe. While the town might have seen him as weak, she now understood that true strength didn't announce itself. It acted quietly, deliberately, and responsibly. Once the cabin was secure, Tomas knelt before the fire and spoke softly, telling her about his childhood among the Apache, the lessons his grandfather had passed down, the traditions he cherished, and the promises he intended to honor in their marriage. Sarah listened closely. realizing that every word reflected wisdom, courage, and respect for life. "You are strong in ways they cannot measure," she whispered. Her hand on his shoulder, the wind outside seemed to respond, howling through the trees but carrying no threat inside the cabin. Thomas reached out and held Sarah's hands firmly, not in a show of dominance, but as a pledge of partnership. "Strength is not in showing power over others," he said. "It is in keeping calm when the world is loud. It is in protecting those you love and in honoring promises. That is what a man must do." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She had always heard the town's rumors, but in this quiet moment she saw the truth. Thomas was a man of integrity, courage, and patience, a man who could face fear without anger, who could defend without violence, and who could love without selfishness. Outside, some settlers were still waiting for the scandal they expected. But within the cabin, a lesson was unfolding that the town would remember for years to come. True manhood, Thomas demonstrated, was not measured by the ability to fight or intimidate, it was measured by wisdom, honor, and loyalty. As the night wore on, Sarah and Thomas sat together by the fire, sharing stories and plans for the future. They spoke about building a home, teaching children, and living in harmony with both settlers and Apache traditions. Every word was a bridge between worlds, showing that understanding and respect could overcome prejudice and fear. By the time the storm passed and the first stars appeared in the sky, Sarah and Thomas had cemented not only their bond but also the lesson that the town would eventually learn. Strength can be quiet, courage can be patient, and love can defy the harshest judgments. And though the townsfolk outside still whispered and doubted, within the cabin the world felt right. Thomas had silenced every doubt, not with force or anger, but with the steady power of integrity, respect, and devotion. For Red Willow, the night would become legendary. Stories would spread for years about how the gentle Apache silenced rumors and won the heart of a woman who saw him for who he truly was. And more importantly, the lesson endured. Real strength is measured not by how loudly it is proclaimed, but by the depth of one's actions. Morning came to Red Willow, painting the horizon with soft gold and pink light. The storm had passed, leaving the streets wet and glistening, the scent of damp earth drifting through town. The whispers from the previous night were still in the air, but something had shifted. Sarah walked into the town square with a quiet confidence, holding Thomas's hand. She carried herself differently now, not out of pride, but because she had witnessed something the town had not, the true strength of a man. Thomas followed calmly, his presence steady, unshaken by judgment or gossip. "Where have you two been all night?" a curious child asked, tilting her head. "We were learning from each other," Sarah replied with a gentle smile. And in that small, simple statement lay a truth few settlers had yet understood. Thomas had spent the night showing Sarah and himself the meaning of real courage. It wasn't in swinging a fist, firing a gun, or intimidating others. It was in patience, protection, and loyalty. The townsfolk slowly noticed. Women who had doubted Thomas now whispered among themselves, "Perhaps he is stronger than we thought." Men muttered, "A quiet man, maybe. But he holds his ground in ways we didn't expect." Even the children, innocent and untainted by prejudice, looked up at him with respect. Sarah took the opportunity to share what she had learned. She spoke about Thomas's upbringing, his Apache heritage, and the values he carried. She told the townsfolk about the importance of listening before acting, of teaching children responsibility and respect, and of approaching conflict with wisdom rather than force. Many settlers had never truly understood the Apache way of life. They had heard stories of raids and battles, but they didn't know that Apache society emphasized balance with nature, honor within the community, and courage rooted in restraint. Sarah explained how men like Thomas were trained not only to survive but to protect and nurture their people. Some settlers scoffed at first. "All talk," one grumbled. But as they observed Thomas interacting with children, helping a farmer repair a fence, and respectfully speaking to elders, their skepticism began to fade. Action spoke louder than words, and Tomas's actions that night and morning had spoken volumes. The old rancher, who had once whispered that Tomas was weak, now approached him cautiously. "Maybe we've been wrong," he admitted, rubbing his chin. "Strength isn't always about who can swing the hardest or shoot fastest. It's about standing steady when the world tries to knock you down." That statement reflected a profound lesson. For decades, settlers had equated manhood with violence, believing that any man who did not fight was less than a man. Tomas's example began to redefine what it meant to be strong, not only for the adults but for the next generation. Children began to understand that courage could be quiet, and true honor required patience, humility, and care for others. By mid-morning, Sarah and Thomas worked together in the small schoolhouse, preparing lessons for the children. Thomas taught tracking, the importance of observing the land, and the wisdom of understanding animal behavior skills that had been passed down through generations of Apache families. Meanwhile, Sarah taught reading, writing, and arithmetic. The children, some Apache, some settlers, listened eagerly. They asked questions about both worlds. "Why do you tie knots in your hands, Mr. Greyfeather?" a boy asked. Thomas smiled, explaining that in Apache culture, knots symbolized unity, commitment, and responsibility. "A promise," he said, "is not strong until you honor it every day." That day marked a turning point for Red Willow. The townsfolk began to see that strength was not one-dimensional. Thomas had proven that leadership, courage, and honor could exist without aggression. He had shown that true manhood included respect, patience, and the ability to uplift others. By evening, even the skeptics had softened. Conversations between settlers and Apache families became easier, tinged with curiosity instead of fear. Children played together along the riverbank, learning from one another in ways their parents had once thought impossible. For Sarah and Tomas, the lesson was clear. Love and respect could challenge deep-seated prejudices, and actions rooted in integrity could reshape an entire community. The wedding night had not just solidified their bond, it had begun a transformation in Red Willow, one that would leave a lasting legacy. Strength, the town realized, could be gentle. Courage could be quiet. And sometimes the loudest lesson of all came not from shouting, but from simply doing what was right. With the first rumors silenced and the town beginning to see Tomas's quiet strength, life in Red Willow settled into a rhythm that was both challenging and rewarding. Thomas and Sarah threw themselves into building a home, not just of wood and nails, but of respect, trust, and knowledge. Their shared vision went beyond personal happiness. It included the entire community. They began by improving the small schoolhouse where Sarah had been teaching. It had once been a single room with rough wooden benches, a blackboard chipped from years of use, and a handful of children who struggled to read or write. Together, Tomas and Sarah transformed it into a place of learning for all children. Apache and settler alike. Tomas taught lessons that were both practical and deeply educational. He showed children how to track animals, read the signs of the land, and understand the patterns of the seasons. He shared stories of Apache history and culture, explaining how his people lived in harmony with the land for generations. These lessons were not only survival skills, but also an education in observation, respect, and critical thinking. Sarah taught reading, writing, and arithmetic, but she also encouraged curiosity and discussion. She invited children to compare her lessons with Tomas's teachings. "How does the land guide your choices?" she asked. "Why is patience important in learning?" Questions like these help children see that knowledge came from many sources, not just books. For the first time, the children of Red Willow experienced a blended education that combined the wisdom of settlers and native traditions. Apache children learned to read and write fluently, while settler children learned the importance of listening to the land and respecting the knowledge of the people who had lived there long before the town existed. Beyond the school, Tomas and Sarah's life together became an example of cooperation and leadership. They farmed a small plot of land near the river, growing vegetables, corn, and herbs. Tomas taught Sarah the Apache techniques for irrigation and soil care methods that had sustained his people for centuries. In return, Sarah introduced new planting methods she had learned in Missouri. Together, they increased their harvest, feeding not only themselves but also neighbors in need. Their home became a gathering place for the town. Settlers who had once been wary now came to seek Tomas's advice on land disputes or to learn about sustainable farming. Apache families shared food and stories. The cabin near the schoolhouse became a symbol of cultural exchange, a safe space where understanding and cooperation could flourish. Evenings were spent around the fire, where Tomas and Sarah would share stories with both children and adults. Tomas spoke of Apache philosophy, how courage was measured by patience, how leadership meant service, and how every action carried consequences. Sarah emphasized the power of literacy and critical thinking, encouraging the settlers to ask questions and challenge assumptions. These lessons slowly began to change the town's culture. The transformation was subtle but profound. Children learned to respect differences and value knowledge from all sources. Adults began to reconsider their prejudices. A town that had once been divided by fear was learning that strength could take many forms. One day, a young settler boy asked Tomas, "Why didn't you fight the men who doubted you?" Tomas smiled and replied, "Strength is not measured by how loud you can shout. It is measured by how you act when no one is watching and how you treat others even when they doubt you." The boy's eyes widened with understanding. That lesson, simple yet powerful, would shape a new generation. Sarah and Tomas also shared a vision for the future. They wanted their children and all children of Red Willow to grow up knowing both worlds. They hoped to create a town where cooperation, education, and respect for heritage were more important than prejudice and fear. In doing so, they honored both their cultures, bridging a divide that many believed was unbridgeable. Through these daily acts, teaching, farming, helping neighbors, and living with integrity, Tomas and Sarah showed Red Willow what true strength and love looked like. They proved that courage could be quiet, that wisdom could be gentle, and that understanding could triumph over fear. By the end of the first year, Red Willow had changed. Children were learning. Adults were questioning old assumptions. And the story of the quiet Apache man and the determined school teacher had become legendary not because of drama or violence, but because of the lessons they taught through living honorably and building their life together. Thomas and Sarah not only created a home, they created a model of coexistence, education, and lasting respect. And the town, slowly but surely, was learning that this was the strongest foundation any community could have. Years passed in Red Willow, and the town slowly transformed from one of suspicion and prejudice to a community of respect and cooperation. The story of Thomas Greyfeather and Sarah Miller, the quiet Apache man and the determined schoolteacher, had become a living legend, told and retold by parents, children, and newcomers alike. Thomas and Sarah's home near the river had grown into a small but thriving farm, surrounded by fruit trees, vegetables, and flowers. Their cabin was modest, but it was filled with laughter, learning, and the warmth of a family rooted in trust and shared purpose. Together, they had children who carried the lessons of both worlds, children who could read and write fluently while understanding the land, its patterns, and the traditions that had sustained Tomas's people for generations. The town watched with awe as the couple continued to quietly influence Red Willow. Tomas's reputation for wisdom and fairness grew. He mediated disputes without aggression, often using the very lessons he had taught the children: patience, observation, and listening before acting. Settlers who had once mocked him now sought his advice on everything from farming techniques to conflict resolution. Sarah's school flourished as well. It was no longer just a place for reading and arithmetic, it became a bridge between cultures. Apache and settler children learned side by side, discovering the value of cooperation and the importance of understanding perspectives different from their own. Sarah incorporated Apache storytelling, teaching history and ethics alongside conventional subjects. The children learned that knowledge came not only from books but from experience, observation, and respect for others' wisdom. The impact on the town was undeniable. Where prejudice had once divided neighbors, cooperation now thrived. Conflicts decreased, and the children grew up understanding that a person's worth was not determined by race or reputation but by character, integrity, and action. Parents began to reflect on their own assumptions, realizing how little they truly knew about the people they shared the land with. For Thomas and Sarah, their personal happiness mirrored their community influence. Their marriage, once doubted and whispered about, became a testament to love rooted in trust, respect, and equality. Thomas's quiet strength, the very trait that had been mocked, proved to be the foundation for a loving home, effective leadership, and positive social change. Even the skeptics softened over time. The old rancher who had once openly questioned Tomas's manhood now spoke with pride. "I was wrong about him. He's the strongest man I've ever known, not because of fists or guns, but because of the heart and mind behind his actions." As the years went by, Thomas and Sarah hosted gatherings where settlers and Apache families shared meals, stories, and lessons. Cornbread, roasted meats, and wild berries were served alongside tales of tracking, survival, and history. Music and laughter filled the air, and the barriers between cultures faded. What had once been suspicion was replaced with curiosity, respect, and friendship. Their children grew up embodying the values their parents had taught them. Thomas's oldest daughter could navigate the forest blindfolded, reading animal tracks and signs of the weather, while her literacy and writing skills matched those of any settler child. Sarah's youngest son could calculate distances, plant crops efficiently, and recite stories of Apache history with pride and understanding. The next generation became the living bridge between two worlds, carrying forward a legacy of mutual respect and shared knowledge. The story of Tomas and Sarah became more than a local legend. It became a lesson for Red Willow and the surrounding frontier. True strength, the townsfolk learned, was not in violence, domination, or fear. It was in patience, wisdom, compassion, and the courage to act rightly, even when others doubted you. Love, respect, and education were the most powerful tools for change in a world too often shaped by prejudice. On warm summer evenings, Thomas and Sarah would sit by the river, holding hands and watching their children play, listening to the laughter of Apache and settler families alike. The town, once divided by fear and rumor, had grown into a community capable of understanding, cooperation, and harmony. And so, the quiet Apache who had been called weak, and the brave schoolteacher who had trusted him, proved something far greater than the skeptics could imagine. They proved that love, integrity, and wisdom could change not just lives, but an entire frontier. The frontier itself, harsh, unpredictable, and unforgiving, remained, as always, a test of resilience. But in Red Willow, the people now understood that strength could take many forms, and that the heart's courage often mattered more than the sword. In the end, Thomas and Sarah's life together was a testament to the enduring power of patience, education, and respect. A happy ending on the FR.